There we go. All right, welcome everybody to the June edition of the Lake Forest Parks and Rec Advisory Board meeting. Thanks for joining. Excuse me. Maybe we can get into the agenda real quick and just take a look at it, make sure that looks right. If you have anything you want to add, that's just Josh and you right now.
We have Maurice Jones online to do another potential park board candidate.
Okay, great. Oh yeah, should we do some, I guess introductions is first, right?
And then we also have an attendee, Matt Wolfer.
Oh yeah. All right, well, welcome everybody.
We have two potential.
All right, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Linda Holman, and many years ago, I was on the park board.
Oh, here we are.
And then it became the Community Services Board, and I was on that. And then I took a break, and here I am again.
Welcome back. You wanna?
And Maurice, are you on there too?
He's muted.
Muted.
Maurice, you're
Okay,
muted.
great. You want to say anything?
Got it.
Hi.
Okay. Hi. So I'm a 25-year resident of Lake Forest Park, and my son went to school here in the neighborhood, and we went to Canada for a while and came back, but never, decided we keep our home because we love the neighborhood. So I took a look at the project. I think it's amazing. I would like to definitely be involved. Whatever steps involved, need to be involved, I will do that.
Great.
Okay.
You are selling yourself a little short. What is the background that you'll bring to the park board?
Oh, you want to hear my background? Okay, great. Okay, right now, I work in community radio. I am a programmer for KVRU FM and KVRU.org. What I bring to the table is I built multi-million-dollar type of facilities for audio, excuse me, for audio. I've run Columbia City Theater probably 6 years ago. I've been in radio now for about 5 years. My background for the most part is I am a musician. My son is a musician, my wife is a musician. And we are currently not looking at moving away from Lake Forest Park.
Great. That's good stuff. Thanks.
Not until I have to go into assisted living.
And did you say Matt was online too? Matt Mullenberg?
Yeah.
I mean, you can feel free to introduce yourself. You don't feel obligated, but feel free.
He, since he opened up to you. No.
Oh, you're now a panelist.
There
Welcome.
it is.
Oh, and thank you. I turned the camera on. I'm busy making dinner for my family, but I didn't want to miss the meeting tonight.
It was nice to meet you. Over to Matt.
Matt and I actually go way back. We've known each other for years professionally. So it was nice to run into him again at a park, actually. So parks bring people together. I guess since we're doing introductions, I'm Tyler Dittman. I'm the chair of the Parks and Rec Advisory Board. Richie, do you want to?
Yeah, hi, I'm Richie. I am also a member. I have been here 2 years or on the board, yeah. And I'm a parent of a 10-year-old in Meridian Park.
Josh?
Hi, I'm Josh Rosenau. I have 3 kids. One is 7 months old, and one's at LFP and one's at Kellogg. And been on the Parks Board for 3 years. And yeah, excited to. Linda and I had a little conversation a while ago, but Maurice, can you tell me anything? Like, where in town do you live? I like the idea of hearing from different parts of the city as we do this, because everyone has their favorite neighborhood park.
Okay. Let's see. Elmore Acres is close to where I am. I'm at 181st and 30th.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, I spend a lot of time between here and the town center.
Yep. I'm all the way up, almost to Mount Lake Terrace. So
Okay.
I envy you the walking distance to shopping there.
Me too. Me myself. It's cool.
Corey,
I'm Corey, I've been with the city for 10 years now. Amber here.
special
Oh,
guest.
sure. I'm Amber Mufusik. I'm a landscape architect at Facet. We're the consultant for the park project.
Great, well, welcome, everybody. We can jump to the adoption of the agenda. Does Parks Board members have a chance to look at it? Corey said done earlier. Any comments, additions, or move to approve in a second?
I move to approve.
Okay,
Second.
great, all in favor?
I,
Aye, okay, that's all of us. And then the review and approval of the prior meetings minutes, which Corey very nicely prepared and sent out for us.
Yeah.
Any comments or move to approve, or yeah, in a second?
second.
Wait, you somebody just
Oh.
moved to approve. I didn't, I can't.
Move to approve.
Okay, between the two of them, one of them moved.
Second.
Somehow, someone,
I know.
or second. And or.
Second. They might have each done both. All in favor?
I,
Aye. Josh raised his hand in an aye sort of way. Thank you very much. We can now get into the business. So we can start with Amber. I think you're first on the agenda.
Great. We are in phase 2 of the Lake Forest Park Lakefront Improvements Project. This commenced last year in July, this phase 2 process. So that built on phase 1, which was a year long. Phase 1, we met 4 times with Parks Board. In phase 2, we will be meeting 6 times with Parks Board, roughly quarterly. It's an 18-month process. So I'm here at what's officially our 3rd in-person meeting. We had sort of a hybrid meeting last month. So our order of operations in terms of public engagement for this project is essentially, I meet with you guys, the Parks Board, to say, here's where we are in the project. Here's how we want to engage the Lake Forest Park public. You guys provide feedback and some direction. We then take that to our community meeting. And then after the community meeting happens, I go to council and I tell the council how we prepared for the meeting, what the Parks Board said, how the meeting went, what the community said, and then reflecting on all of that, the council gets to make their comments and have their update. So that is why we did the hybrid meeting last time, but basically still had that important communication touch point, because I need your input before I engage your community. So that's why we did that for the May meeting. We did have our community engagement meeting, which is some of what I'll share here. So here again is our schedule overview of phase 2. This is, you'll see grayed out on the left side of the frame, what we have worked our way through thus far. Then on the right side of the frame, this is where we are now. So we are currently in 70%, what this we call a 70% design plan. We have created our designs that reflect 70% completion. And the reason that that's an important milestone is that it gives us really good information to get a really good cost estimate, a cost estimate with pretty high confidence. And that then allows us to still have essentially 30% of the design development left, where if the cost comes in too high, if something, we can see what is driving cost, we might need to tune that down in order to, get to a cost target. So we have been discussing cost since the very beginning of this project. It was one of the first things that we asked about back in, we started in July 2023. So right then it was, how much are we thinking that this park should cost? And we were given basically 2 main data points, which were the 2 recent park projects in Kenmore, as kind of a bookend of where we were hoping to come with our construction cost. So we continue to be on track with that target, a construction cost within those windows. But construction is what you pay to build the thing, right? There's all of these other costs to get you to that point. And so, you will see when the cost estimate is done, you'll see a larger cost that represents construction plus all of those add-ons. So a little bit of that'll be coming in the next meeting. Our cost estimate process takes about 6 weeks. We did see a preliminary cost estimate that we then provided some comments on internally back to our cost estimator, who's an outside person. They're kind of outside of the design process, which allows them to not fill in the gaps based on being too in the mix with the design. So we get an outside opinion of how cost is looking. That final estimate, the final 70% estimate, will be done on July 3rd, and it will go to council that day. It'll also go to you guys that day, so it'll be in the council packet, and I'll present more information at the council work session on July 10th. So that's the time when I'll get to sit down with them and discuss the cost. It is entirely possible that some of the council members may really get into the estimate and have some really good questions. It's also very entirely possible that they will look at it and have more interpretation and understanding questions that meeting might be. So I'm not expecting any like cost management or value engineering decisions to be made at the council work session on July 10th. But they may surprise me. You never know. More than anything, I think it's going to be, they have my time and then they'll deliberate and probably have some questions for you guys, I'm guessing. So that's where we are currently. Is the design team is on hold and we are just waiting for the cost estimate period to go. Once we get that discussion with council and council provides us feedback on whether we can stay the course with the current design, whether we need to do some cost management exercises or whether we need to actually value engineer and cut some of the scope, we will make that change and that'll be incorporated into the 100% design. So that's where we are in terms of cost. So our construction documentation process, we have completed our geotechnical groundwater readings. That's basically something that takes a year. We do some geotechnical borings to show us what the subsurface conditions are. And then they actually install groundwater monitoring wells so we can watch how rainwater and lake activity, how that impacts the subsurface conditions in the park. This is an area that is former lake bed. It used to be under Lake Washington and then the locks were built and it was lowered. So we have anticipated that we would get, high groundwater and liquefiable soils, being that this is old lake infrastructure. We did, or old lake subsurface condition. We did let the council know that ahead of time. We put in cost contingencies in case that was the result. It is the result. So now we're here saying those contingencies were wise. We don't need to ask for more money to retrofit, structures and all of that type of thing. So we have conclusively completed those readings. That is the case. It's what we expected to find. We found. Our design completion, we are looking at, I think I mentioned this stuff. So our next design milestone is what we would call 100% design. And that means that it fully describes the project enough that we can submit for building permit. But we actually then have one more revision to the plans that would occur after that to incorporate any building permit comments. And that is what we would call the bid set. And that's what would actually be used for engaging a construction contractor. So don't worry that the next milestone is 100. There's still one more touch point to make tweaks and revisions if we could too. Okay, so permitting. So a big part of this process is permitting. We have lots of permits that we need to get from city, state, and federal permits. We have lots of environmental permitting. We also have standard things, clear and graded building permit, demo permit, that type of thing. So we have submitted for our land use permits, and those are under environmental review, or those are under local review. We have received the preliminary comments on that, but we haven't received a decision. This is the point in the process where we then respond to the local comments. We also have early input from Washington Ecology, who would be one of the ultimate approvers of the very important permit, the shoreline variance that we need to do this project. And so we're in a good shape in terms of getting a lot of feedback on the design and then being ready to respond to it. Now, we are not responding yet because if council tells us to make modifications to the design, then the response would be different. And so we're not investing that time now. Essentially, everybody is on hold. Once we get that decision, hopefully on July 10th, that everything looks good and we can proceed as the design currently is, then we can just respond to those comments and move the design forward. Okay, let's see. Our state and federal permits are still in review. Those typically take a year. And so, we are still tracking that in the schedule. Okay. So our workshop recap, workshop number 4, this is the second of 2 workshops in phase 2. So we had 2 workshops in phase 1, 2 workshops in phase 2. We had an earlier workshop in this phase back in the fall. And the goal of this workshop was to take all of the comments received through the public comment process. So this is after the land use permits have been submitted. The project documents are online. Anyone who wants to comment on the project can do so. We received, I think it was 50 total pages of comments from the city, in the public comment period. Those included like a single page letter from the Duwamish tribe. It also included, multi-page letters from some commenters. It might have included like a printed email. So, it wasn't 50 pages of single written text. It was just a compiled document, but lots of input. The reason that that's great is that people are paying attention. And so if we get the information now, they're not likely to be surprised and upset later. So this is actually really, really excellent to have a lot of constructive feedback at this point in the process. So what we did for our approach to workshop number 4 is basically go through all of those comments and pick out what were the kind of key emerging themes that people had questions of and points of clarification about the design. And then we developed exhibits to describe specifically what is going on with those dimensions of the project. So those dimensions were parking and traffic. A lot of people had questions about parking and circulation and traffic. The park design and intensity of use. We heard a lot of people saying, what are there's an active park that you're proposing. So we needed to clarify, what active and passive use really means and refers to, and then really provide something that showed, this is the end goal. When you look at the renderings that we've had, you're kind of zoomed in on a little bit of development. And so if there's development in each of those renderings, it makes you think the whole thing is developed. And what we really wanted to convey is that, the touch on this park is actually much lighter than the current stage of development, which is one of the reasons why we developed the model. And then a lot of people had questions about the preserve. So how is the preserve changing? I love the preserve. It's a place that I go to every day. I'm really worried about changes to preserve. We heard that a lot of care, a lot of sentiment about that place. So we wanted to really accurately convey what would be the changes that would be occurring there. Okay, so we had 48 people sign in on the sign-in sheet. There were also additional people that we recognized that did not sign in. So, we had at least 48 people, plus attendees, some other attendees and staff. I don't think any of the officials signed in either. I didn't catch that on the sign-in sheet.
I was very bad at making people sign in on this one. So there was more than the 48 for sure.
Yeah, I
So
mean,
the guys signed
between
in.
staff, they're good. Between staff, Parks Board and city council members that were there, I'm sure that we were probably close to 60. So, okay. We had 43 responses through the survey. So each of our meetings we do in a hybrid format. Means we have an in-person forum, but then we also have an online survey that allows people to provide their feedback, and then we can also tabulate the feedback pretty easily through that. And not everybody can make a weekday evening meeting. So all of the exhibits that you'll see at any of the meetings are always online after, and then there's a survey. We got 43 responses on the survey as of yesterday, and I do have those preliminary responses, and Corey can share those ahead of this meeting. The survey is going to close on July 1st, and so we'll reissue the comments at that time. But the highlights of the comments are that it says attached here, but I realize you guys didn't get them before the meeting. So net positive responses, people are generally supportive of the project. We continue to get mixed and balanced feedback. So you'll see a comment that says not sufficient parking, and then the next person will say no cars, period. There shouldn't be any cars. Don't put a playground. This should be a passive use park. And the next person is, there should be more active recreation. We need a playground. The playground should be bigger. So it's what it tells me as a facilitator of this project is that we're in the middle. Not making anyone exactly happy for the most part, but we've hit the point of consensus of where the design is representing some balance. So granted, there were a lot of people that said all positive things in the survey responses, but in terms of the community conversation, it seems like we're hitting a midpoint, which I think is great. Okay, so emergent themes, operations and maintenance costs. A lot of people I love it. How much is it going to cost the city in the long run? Do we have the resources to manage and maintain this? Excellent question, very valid question. Since the beginning of this project, we have talked about that as being a concern for the city, and what are we putting in that then represents a lifetime commitment of cost to the city, and then how will that happen? So we looked at some O&M costs early on in the schematic design phase. So I'm not sure how many of you have the schematic design report that's available online on the park website, which is LFP lakefrontpark.com. And there's a project documentation page. It's got a schematic design package that includes a booklet with a cost estimate table. And that forecasts things like how many times based on the amount of lawn that we have, will the park need to be mowed? How much do we estimate for weeding and trees and vegetation maintenance each year? What about, emptying trash cans? All of those in terms of man-hour estimates of what we anticipate the park is going to cost per year from a labor hour standpoint, and then what the city currently pays its park management crews and what that translates to in a staffing cost. So that type of information has always been something that we've been discussing, and it is going to be updated in the 70% cost. So we'll have an updated look at what we would call the life cycle cost of the park itself. So that's coming, and the public is tuned in. Community is very interested in, I love this, but can we sustain it, is what we heard from a lot of individuals. Okay. Any questions or comments on the workshop recap? Okay, we'll issue a summary, once we get the survey results in. Please encourage people to take the survey. Oh, Josh, I see you had your hand up.
Oh, I was gonna ask, and maybe you were about to say that. I would love to see the full set of responses once they're done, I guess. I
Yeah,
forgot that they were still coming in.
They are, yeah. So like we had 43, hopefully we'll get a handful more between now and July 1st.
I'll be at concert in the park tomorrow,
Yay.
so maybe we'll get some more.
Do you have a board with the QR code on it, or do you want me to send you one?
I do,
Okay,
yeah, well, I'll.
okay. Okay, yeah, if you need like an updated, like 8.5 by 11.
I have.
Okay. All right, great. Yeah, hopefully we can get people to be taking it on their phone right at the concert. And then, like I said, we've got the preliminary feedback, but early in the survey, the first people to respond sometimes skews one way, and then as results trickle in, it balances out a little bit more. So, but I'll be providing that to Corey when the survey closes on July 1st. Okay, so I'm going to move on to some new content, which is placemaking. So an element of this park has always been, who is it? What is it? We've got things the landscape is telling us. There's definitely interesting things about the architecture. What we call this in design and in the park world is placemaking. So essentially, how will people connect to this place? What will become its personality? How do people love it already? And what will resonate with them in terms of feeling like the place is authentic? So for example, you might think of a heavily curated environment like a Disney theme park. Everything kind of fits with each other, and it's got all of this, it's got a lot of kitsch and stuff. And then you may also think like the character of the Pioneer Square district in Seattle, where it's just got an oldness to it that starts to say that the neighborhood is like this, So parks, even small ones, have this same quality. We wouldn't necessarily think about doing something like a graffiti wall in this park if it doesn't speak to the park's qualities and the park's placemaking. We want people to feel like it's a unified experience. It's got its quirks and eccentricities that are really characteristic of Lake Forest Park, and that it relates to this place. And so a handful of things that we talk about with placemaking and how we can make that stronger are things like park naming, interpretation, art, also other things like materials. So for example, all of the work that was done for the demolition where we salvaged old brick and old wood, that's all really representative of the character and the history of this place. And so that's part of the placemaking as well. And that's one of the reasons why we didn't want to lose those elements. And those will actually be incorporated into the new park construction so that the park continues to maintain its personality that it's already got. We don't want to like impose personality on it necessarily. We want to figure out what the city and community is already thinking about it, and then bring those things to the forefront. So park naming is a big important thing. If you think of a park name, I don't know, Octavia Butler Park. I know Octavia Butler is a fixture in Lake Forest Park. Would be a very different experience than like the Dallas Cowboys Super Park. It's like a very different thing that you would expect just by what the name might be. So naming is a important decision. It's how people will know and relate to this place for a long time. So I'm going to turn the park naming topic over to Corey for just a kind of a little bit of a here's how it might go, and here's what I said.
Kind of brief on it tonight, but I think this round I do want to survey the community, but I think I want the park board to really do some research and figure out maybe give some options to the community this time, that reflects the history of this park, because there is a lot of history, surrounding from when it was first purchased. So lots for us to think about, and maybe another conversation we'll have to bring the Shoreline Historical Museum in, because we did tour them in April. And it was a conversation we started to have with them on polling some more history. So maybe in the next meeting or two, we can bring them, see if they're available to come in, chat with them, then we can start brainstorming some names along with description of like why, and go out to the community and survey. Go about there.
Can you remind me how we do our last few park names?
So
I think I've done two, right?
Yeah, pulled up 5 Acre Woods,
Yeah.
and originally we just sent out a giant survey of like, what do you want to name this park? So then we had hundreds of options to go through, but really that one was a lot of 5 Acre Woods, so we kind of knew.
Already had a nickname.
Yeah. And then same with Brookside, we did the same Brookside and 5 Acre Woods, so. But this round, I want park board to maybe be a little bit more conscious about the naming, and then don't have a limit, don't have an idea of how many we wanna put out to the community. And you wanna bring the mayor in on this conversation too, instead of go on the street. Josh,
Do you remember with Blue Heron Park? I don't know if any of you guys remember this. Since I'm the oldest living person in my first park, I remember all of it. It ended up being a contest for all the children in the Lake Forest Park school system to be able to name it. And one of the kids had seen a blue heron in the street. And that's how that happened. So that was kind of a nice little thing in engaging the children in it. And they really all came up with some interesting names too. So just something for the putting the hop.
Oh, can I ask one more real quick before we go to Josh? The next, so the final process though is it goes to the city council for the actual
Yes.
name, right?
Yeah,
So
they
we
will have to-
recommend it or give us some context.
Yeah.
They actually approve the name,
Right.
okay,
Yeah.
just to put in all perspective, thank you. Josh?
Yeah, so Linda, I don't think maybe I did know somewhere in the back of my head that Blue Heron was named that way, but it's a thought that had occurred to me for this. Question for Corey. I assume that Lion Creek Preserve will retain its name? Or is this unified park gonna have one big name?
I think that's something we have to talk about as
Okay.
well. I do.
Yeah, I don't know if that was a decision that had already been made or if it was gonna be
No,
part of
that was-
this discussion.
No decision, but I do see the preserve still staying the preserve to
Sure.
where this park can just have a preserve side and a park side.
And it has to, I mean, that's not a decision, but.
Right, this project does not undo the preserve designation and limitations that are present on the preserve property. As long as it's, a public park operated in the way that it was, developed for in 1998 under that hearing examiner's decision, it's a preserve with limited activity.
And then the other thing I was going to point out, and this isn't a thought that was original to me. I was talking to someone about this the other day, but I was remembering also when we were at the Shoreline Historical Society or Museum, in the map that they had there, based on that survey from 1860 something, there had been a tribal village, a fishing village, very close to where this site is. And I wonder if we might solicit suggestions of names from, I know that there's been some consultation with the tribes already through this process, and if there's any reason not to ask for suggestions.
There's no reason not to. And there's also some historic trees out there that I've thought, and Amber, and I have talked about this. She made a suggestion of reaching out to the tribes and maybe helping naming some of these trees that are out there too.
Yeah.
And we will have to look at naming a building or two as well, so. There will be lots of things to.
Yes.
And then there, you know, when we get to the fundraising part of it too is, we're not there yet, but how, like, do we want to go? Does someone want to adopt a tree as part of the fundraising versus, you know,
Benches, bricks.
yeah, and benches will be on the board for sure, but. Yeah, so there's lots of different ways we can bring in naming and fundraising. But the park, I think the main park structures and the park board should.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. I think it might be nice to see sort of all the naming stuff kind of in one
Yeah, maybe.
collected spot. Like what do we have to think about naming wise here? Because some of the names that we come up with might actually be, we might think they are better at a different spot. Like maybe they're good for a building or a tree or the lakefront, or I don't know how many things there are to name. But it might just be good to have that context in mind. Also on the preserve, I think it's worth looking into whether we need to keep preserve in like the name of the park, or if that was actually something the city chose at that point just to designate it as not a full-on active use park. So maybe that's just the preserve section versus having preserve in the actual name. See, going both ways, but
Maybe at the whatever park it's called, I'll be on the preserve side.
there you go. So that'd be good to maybe, I don't know, maybe, I guess we can look into that, like what the naming requirements are.
I'll get the line creek.
Okay.
And certainly calling it the Lion Creek Preserve in this park is if nothing else, descriptive.
Yeah,
I mean, it is the preserve around Lion Creek within this park.
right.
And so even if we sort of lowercase some of that in our minds, that'll still be true.
Yeah, I think it's important. I think it is descriptive, right? As I remember it, the point of the preserve is to preserve the creek and the stuff around it and the stuff in it. So I think that seems.
I have a
relevant still.
question if you know.
Sure.
Yeah.
Is there a plan to do some landscape restoration in the preserve side?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Yeah, there definitely is. And that's all of those exhibits online for the last workshop go pretty extensively into what the changes in the preserve will be. So that should be helpful. But if there's any additional questions, just let me know. And we will be providing the 70% plans to the city for review when we provide the 70% cost estimate. So you'll actually see a more detailed view than you've ever seen of the work, including things like what the foundations of things will look like, which we have never dived into before. And then also things like the specific plant list. You know, we haven't provided a specific planting plan before. We've provided a candidate planting plan. So more
like that.
clarity to come on that. But yes, extensive replanting and it's some enhancement of the landscape there. And then some trails restoration. There's a handful of trails on the far bank.
Yeah.
That those will be decommissioned and that area will be restored. And so the public access will be off of the park side, and then you'll still have access to the platform that's there. But then you'll be walking back essentially. So I can go into more on that. If you guys have any questions on that or later, whenever that works.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So the big thing about park naming is that it's not part of the consultant scope. This is an exercise that the city does. And that you guys are really tasked with this most important part of how this park is going to be, what its legacy is going to be. So happy to help and facilitate in any way that you know, if you need more information that I have, great. And then of course, once decisions are made, things like, you know, the letters on the signboard will include those elements, and we can talk more to specific design changes that might come with those design refinements of the park to make sure that its name and its personality are echoing each other. Okay.
Can I ask real quick on the
Yeah, of
timeline
course.
part of that? What,
I mean, our
Okay.
goal is to open the park in 2027.
so we need to name by that.
Yeah.
Got it. So we have,
Just kidding, but
I have updated, and Corey, I'll talk with you about this at our project management meeting, our next project management meeting. But basically our updated timeline, we have, potential park opening, refining down into, April 2027 at the soonest, in all likelihood. That's assuming that things will not go perfectly in construction, and there will be some contingency time at the end of that. So, you should by no means publish that as a ribbon cutting deadline, but that would be the tracking of, you should have a name by then.
the city shop, like, just forewarning. Construction might be done, but we might need some time internally to learn how to run this, so. We might it might take us a while to be fully open, or the buildings fully open, or something like that, but.
I have another question, I'm sorry.
Sure.
Sorry, it's my first meeting.
Go for it.
Excuse me, is there a plan either in the active part of the park or in the preserve, or both of them, to do any kind of educational signage about plants? Are you folks looking at, perennials? Are you looking at, low water usage? So would there be information telling people, look over here, this is what you like to plant if, your yard is shady, and this is evergreen, and this, just some kind of educational piece, maybe with a QR code they could look up or something.
So I would say yes and no. I would say, we are talking about interpretation for the park, and that's actually one of the things we're gonna talk about today, which would be so fun. The interpretation for the park is based on what we have heard from the community and what we heard through our interpretive planning session about what people were particularly interested in about this place. And so we didn't have a lot of, landscape utility to plants, but we know that there are groups like the Master Gardeners who were very involved in Lake Forest Park, and who were perfect, who were interested in potentially having retreats, or in the community center that's there. And so my thing is that I would anticipate that education and interpretation that's part of the park's messaging is going to change and evolve over time. What I would deal with in terms of the what's going to be there when the park opens is what is included in the scope and what is informed by the process thus far. And so we do have an interpretive plan for the park, which was drafted as part of phase 1 that's available online, and it goes into what are it's not an exhaustive 500-page dissertation about the park's history. It is a accounting and a compilation of the things that informed that. So for example, Lake Forest Park's mission, the mission of the Stewardship Foundation, I think, was a representative at the meeting. We also had a handful of other individuals that participated, and then some things that we heard from the Historical Society are present in there. And then when we talked about those key themes, we then discussed those key themes in this group, and we actually felt like one was missing, which was about just the importance of this place as a place of leisure and recreation for a very long time. Social gathering at the waterfront being a really key tenet that not only is present on this property, but is part of the reason that this park is happening, and is the way that contemporary people and people in the future will participate in this place, is through leisure and recreation and social connection on this place. So we added an additional interpretive theme, and then we took those to the community and got the community's feedback on what things in those themes they're particularly interested in, and then what particular stories they wanted to tell. So that's what the interpretive work is based on, and so you won't actually see any plant tags. But it doesn't mean that we can't add them later. It doesn't mean that they can't be added at another point. And it doesn't mean that there aren't notes of that that we can incorporate into what I'm going to show you next. So the way that we do interpretive projects is we start with a 30% design. The 30% design is essentially a napkin sketch that says one of the many myriad ways that you can take our interpretive plan and you can make it an interpretive exhibit is like this. So we basically put together a handful of napkin sketches that say, here's a rough idea, and here's what it responds to in terms of our interpretive planning. It's not a detailed design. It's flexible, we can modify it, we can scrap one idea and do a new idea. There's a lot that we can do in terms of the interpretation, but what we need to do in order to move the design any further is get consensus on the fact that we're going in the right direction. So if this idea looks like it's the right one, if we're leaving people with the right sense of place, if we are communicating the right underlying idea of how people are relating to the place that they're in, then we can move the design forward. We wait until basically 70% design on a place before we draw interpretation, because the interpretation has to fit seamlessly into the place. It can't look like it was just stuck there, if that makes sense. So we're at the right place in the design process to pivot from furthering the park design while we're waiting on cost estimates and all of that, to think we have a good picture in our mind's eye of what we're hoping that this park will look like. And so now what are the interpretive exhibits that we can integrate into the place? So there's not any more comments or questions on park naming. I can skip forward into the interpretive design concepts.
Sounds good.
Okay, great. All right, so I'm going to quickly go over the scope and timeline. I'm going to show you a recap of our themes and the feedback that we received. And then we'll go through the concept presentation of our 30% designs, and then we can discuss what you think about them. Okay, so our scope. So the current design scope includes 3 exhibits. Exhibits can be a series of things. So for example, when we've done many plant tag exhibits, they count as one. You might have a series of 10, but it's still one exhibit because they're all, unifying through an idea and a curricula, basically. So you will see 3 multi-part exhibits essentially in the next presentation. It's more about the design idea and that it responds to the interpretive themes. We seek out things that are immersive. So the idea would be that as the experience is around you and you're getting the interpretation, it's making your experience in the place deeper. It's not necessarily something that you might look at and then not be a part of when you're engaging in the rest of the place. So good interpretation, they say, should provoke you to want to learn more about the place that you're experiencing. And so that's the goal that we're hoping to achieve. So the cost. So many things, size, quantity, materials, how things are paid for often, affects what the cost will be. And so especially whether it's a cost that's borne by the project or not. So for example, if we are doing interpretive, brick walk with historical statements, maybe those historical statements also have donor bricks that are paid for. And so it actually doesn't represent a project cost because it's covered completely by outside funding. Myriad things can affect the cost. So we actually don't explore the cost until we get to 70% design. So I don't have any costs for you about the elements that I'm going to show you. I can speculate, but ultimately it will be engaging vendors to see, how much do we want to get for a cost to refine some decision making. That said, we are working on a cost estimate. And so we needed to include a number in the cost estimate for if these elements that we've proposed were going to be provided at the park, what's a ballpark for their cost of the construction? And we assumed $30,000 for the installation of these, the cost and installation. Because of some of these, we would anticipate that several of them might be things that the city purchases first and then hands to the contractor and they install, in which case it's not going to cost the contractor $30,000 to install all these things, but that is the, rough priming number that's currently included in the budget. Okay, and then the timeline. So we're doing our 30% interpretive concept presentation at 70% design. We will have a 70% interpretive design at 100% park design, and then our 100% final interpretive design will be basically completed at the bid set. So we're staggered off by 1 design increment. Okay, so here is a quick summary of the main themes that we had. What you see on the top are the survey results of very interesting, somewhat interesting, neutral, or not interesting, based on those top interpretive themes. So the interpretive themes, we had reconciliation work begins by acknowledging past damage done to communities and ecosystems connected to this site. This resonated with the least number of people, and we saw that also echoed in the survey results. We had, by better understanding the natural systems connected to this shoreline, people can restore those systems to more self-sufficient conditions. This was our most popular interpretive theme. This was what people said they really thought that this theme resonated with them in terms of the story of the park and the work being done. And then we had throughout history, people have connected with each other and the environment through their presence and activities near the lakeshore. And this was our second most popular. So we also had a number of sub themes. I'm going to read just the most popular ones. Indigenous knowledge of this place is critical to the resilience of the watershed. Social gathering and leisure activities support personal connection and build communities and culture. And outdoor experiences and nature immersion foster mental and physical well-being. So these were our like most popular themes based on the survey and the community. We also had from the public comments. So we had a, what other things would you like us to be talking about when we engage the public? And we heard a lot of comments about wildlife and salmon, a lot of comments about Indigenous culture, significance and influence specifically to this area. We heard a lot about the site and city history. So what Lake Forest Park was like before and after the lake lowering, the history of people being on this place. There was a lot of talk about public access, equity, and inclusion, that there were wealthy individuals who recreated on this shoreline, and that its transition into being an open public place. We had many people saying, this is so wonderful. This is the first time that we've had this. And then comparing it to other sites in the city and saying, what a wonderful thing that this is open for all. So some great ideas there. How we basically came up with 3 concepts for how those could be explored on the site. And one of the most important things that we felt like is just how the landscape changed when the lake was lowered. So this is something that influences the site today. It also tells us about the connection between the nature of the natural world and the nature of the contemporary world today that is affected by development, but we can do our best to restore function to natural systems without necessarily restoring to a pre-settlement condition. And I think this is particularly important on this place, because as much as we might talk about wildlife that was here and what was happening here, this is fairly new, right? This land is just, young from the perspective of much of the other land that's higher in the watershed. That we have this ring of relatively new nascent land around Lake Washington, and it's there because of development. So it's a neat part of the story. And I think it also starts to change the way that you think when you're standing in it and you actually realize kind of, where the old lakeshore was. So what we've designed for the first exhibit is a set of historical lake level markers. So this is a series of markers that'll be throughout the site that'll convey the historical water level and where you were and essentially where that transect was. So to start to, there's a concept called geointerpretation, which is basically the inclusion of maps and of spatial thinking helps to modify people's awareness and their understanding of how they fit in the world and how they connect to a site. And it's designed to change your perception. And so that's what this exhibit is, we're hoping to do. So visitors hopefully, again, will better understand the relationship to the landscape, but also how human activities have shaped the ecology and then how nature has responded. So when we look at this site and we might see, stream insects that are present here or deer that are present here, they have been here for less than 150 years, right? Is that right? Close to it, yeah. So 1912, right? Isn't that when they lived like? All right. So here is our historic lake level markers. So here's our historic lake level markers. And so the old lake level is roughly at 28 feet. So currently the lake is at 18 and a half, and it's a managed lake elevation. And so the entirety of the site was actually underwater prior to the lake lowering. So it is a relatively new landscape. As soon people were here prior to when the lake was lowered, and then when the lake was lowered, we were here and even farther into the lakeshore. So the interesting thing about the prior lake level is that it really represents a threshold to entering the park. So what we're proposing is essentially an inlay. This can be, there's some nice pictures here that show an inlay of bronze set in concrete. That's not a cheap way to do it, but it is lovely and timeless, and it lasts a very long time. You can substitute that with something like aluminum and it drops the cost substantially. It's not, notably different. Powder coated steel also looks lovely. Corten steel, also cheaper. So again, there's still time and decision making to flex cost to what we want it to be, where we can still get the effect of having something that's rich and embedded in the place. But so the goal would be some type of signifier on the pedestrian path at the 28 contour. This is roughly where it's located, is sort of right on the property line. And then having that these markers be at the 28 elevation throughout the park. So when you walk into the park, it would be at the ground level. As you walk further into the park, you're actually descending, getting closer to the lake level itself. So you would see the next marker on essentially, maybe 2 feet above the ground at the edge of the bathhouse building. And then you would see the next one 3 feet above the ground on the edge of the deck. And so as you're walking, these are going from being the plane that you're standing on to knee level, and then waist level, and then higher to chest level, and then above your head. So we anticipate one on the play structure, and one that one's on the shower right there, which is the tallest element at that part of the park. We could put one on a tree, but then sometimes they grow into the tree, and fixing things to trees not necessarily a preferred thing to do. So in this case, you would essentially have some on the corner of the picnic pavilion, and the goal would be, and you can sort of see this in the image there, is that as you're looking back across the site, your eye is connecting these blue medallions in a plane that you are then understanding that you're below the historic lake level. And so it's a subtle note to say, this is what this place used to be, and here's where we are now. It's not meant to be in your face. The hope would be that some people will go, what is that? And then they'll notice that there's a couple, and then they'll connect to it. So if you happen to miss the inscription or the detail when you're coming into the park, you may notice it and catch it later. This is also provides some flexibility in terms of cost. The way that these are set up now, the goal is that as you're coming down the path, you see the next one, and maybe you'll see 2 or 3 at a time, but you don't necessarily see all of them. If we wanted to scale this up and put one on each opposite building corner or add a few others, we could. That of course increases the cost, but maybe getting a run of something like a metal medallion made, there's not a big difference between if you get 6 or if you get 8. Usually the first one is the most expensive, and then reprints on that are substantially less expensive. So a handful of ways that we can look at this as a concept, but that's a general idea. We did pull some of the patterning out of Lake Forest Park's current logo. If you are in the process of updating your logo, we might not make that decision. But if this is, part of the city's identity, we thought it was an interesting way to meld those two things. The ordinary high watermark symbol is that triangle caret above stacked lines. And then this is also very similar to, it's FEMA's, FEMA has I think it's called, I don't remember if it's water levels or water lines, but they have a program where they have a similar, we actually found it today after coming up with this idea weeks ago, which theirs is a star kind of floating above like a handful of lines, but it's also representative of the program is about getting people to think about flood levels in their community, which is pretty interesting. So again, keying you into where you are on the earth and how the hydrology around you is affecting it. You can see in this little picture here, we're talking about something that's fairly small. So this is representing, 3 to 4 inches. We could go smaller than that. If we do more, we could go, if these are all over, we're going to want them to be fairly small, like badge sized. If there's a couple, then something that's a little bit larger, but I really wouldn't go much larger than 3 to 4 inches. Okay. So that's exhibit number 1. So exhibit number 2 is a wildlife scavenger hunt. So this is going to be a series of pavement markings around the park that'll represent biodiversity of the park, including native plants, animals, and insects that inhabit the shoreline habitat. So we are proposing basically an exhibit within the community center. So we have the community center, we have the annex building. It could be in both, depending on how we, print it. If it's a fancy, nice poster in a frame, we could probably put up several of those. If it's a, nice engraved Corten steel type thing, it's expensive, we'd probably just get one. But again, numerous ways that we can flex the cost. So the exhibit would provide basically the symbol that is out in the landscape and then some information about it. So this is a really good way to incorporate some of the storytelling, whether it is educational. So is it Latin names? Is it talking about, you know, the where the animal lives, animal sightings, that type of thing? Is it indigenous names? So are we working with the tribes to name these animals in their historical names? And then we're hoping that this will engage visitors in the site's ecology, and then understanding also that there are species that are sharing this landscape. So could be plants and animals, could be stream insects, fish, kokanee, not here presently, but still very, very important to the site's history and hopeful eventual return of that, that ecology. So here are some thinking about the wildlife scavenger hunt. So this would be basically an impression. It could also be something like an inlaid medallion, but an impression into the concrete would be something that we could do cost effective. And I think, and I'll talk about this when I talk about art, I think provides some very interesting opportunities to get an artist involved. But so something not big, you know, and probably flexing with the species size that we're talking about. So maybe, you know, 4 to 6 inches stuck into the pavement as you're walking onto the dock, or as you are stepping into the preserve area, or where we have, you know, little bits and corners so that you eventually will notice them all. Maybe the first time you're at the park, you'll see 1 or 2, and then it'll get you curious about looking for other things and understanding what that storytelling is about. This would also be something that would be wonderful to have online, whether it's a fold out pamphlet. This is something, if we do a press into the concrete, we would want to be ready to have all of those done during construction. The first one, we could add those in after construction was finished, if this was something that you wanted to look at later. Same thing like signs, if we wanted to do wayside signs in a separate run, but this would definitely need to be done during construction if we do it this way that's proposed. This did come specifically out of some feedback from the community. We had a young man at some of the very early thinking about this who was saying, you know, can we incorporate play through a scavenger hunt? That was really a wonderful thing. This would be a way of carrying it into the site's construction, having it be integrated, having it be understated. And I think, again, the art integration potential is pretty exciting. So these are a little bit hard to see up on this map, but these red dots are just some potential locations that we can do that. I think a series of 10 to 12 would be really wonderful.
And I mean, that art could also be, you know, sourced from school kids also potentially.
Oh yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, that could be really fun.
And used at other parks too.
Mhm.
Under-
Yeah. Yeah, the cost of a concrete stamp is not a lot.
Right.
You know, you can get a concrete stamp, a decent size one, printed for $100, sometimes less, sometimes more. It's basically a rubber stamp, you know, that's a lot more resilient and slightly deeper. Again, I think this is a cost-effective way. You could use the set of stamps once they've been used once, you know, you could keep them, use them again. Yeah, fun idea. Okay. So our next one is historical viewpoints. So this is a series of historical photographs. There are so many overlaying stories on this site of different times and histories. And we have seen some of those images through the Historical Society. And they basically said, we have too much information. You have to provide us with some focus, tell us what you need, and then we can go down that route. But there's so much, you know, there's all sorts of photographs of this time and all different views. And because the structures are still standing, and because there's things like trees that are still there, and there's, you know, you can look across the lake and you can recognize things in the natural view, it is not difficult to put yourselves in those photographs. You know, we have a wonderful picture of, I don't know if it's Pearl Hayward Gates or if it's someone else from that time, standing on the porch of the house that will still be standing and will actually be more closely, you know, restored to resemble what the house looked like then, and will have the same deck that people can stand on. And so, well, not the same deck, but a new deck. So you can actually stand in that place. And the more of those photos that we're seeing, it is that reminder of people have been here, they have gathered here, and you're a person who's here and gathering. And so again, trying to get people to connect not just with the place, but the history of Lake Forest Park through the place. And then also the history of social gathering and recreation that's here, and understanding that they're continuing to contribute to that history and that this place belongs to everyone, especially, you know, through this project and their participation in it at this point. Okay, so historical viewpoints. So we have a handful of these drawn. So mainly looking at notable features. So looking basically, you know, towards the house with the back of the garage, the older structure. You can imagine also what this looks like now. You can stand in this place today and you're looking at the backside of the fence, but you can see the peaks of the roof over top of it. We would probably pick the more interesting of those couple of photos, but here, so this is the old, was this the Turner house? Which house was this?
The Morris.
The Morris house. Right, so a view from the Morris house, if we can find one, a view looking back at the Morris house that stood in that location. Looking there's actually this photo up here in the corner. Appears to be looking, you know, at paddlers, but I don't know if this is Mosquito Fleet, and I don't know if this is the mouth of the creek, but this was definitely a Lake Forest Park shoreline photo. And so that also could be a view that might be incorporated here, looking out towards the mouth of the creek. We do have some photos of Indigenous activity in this area. Obviously, they aren't, unless they're post-settlement and post the lake being lowered, they're not right there. But it doesn't mean that we couldn't find a wonderful photo, maybe looking across the water or out at the water, that shows some of the traditional cultural importance and activities of the site. So, and then a few, you know, again, we've got a wonderful photo looking at the house from this direction. I'm hoping that we can find maybe a photo from the house looking out, and then some others. So the quantity of these, the location of them, the orientation of them would be heavily dependent on what we can find from the Shoreline Historical Society, or that other people, if we do a call for historical photos, we know that people have come to the meetings that have lived on this property before. You know, if many of these photographs are from around the time the lakes were lowered, when the Mosquito Fleet was operating, when the Gates family was living there, that's great, but we may also have one from the 60s that's really fun, you know? So it might be just a neat sort of call for photographs. And as many of these as we put in, it doesn't mean that we can't have a additional photo lookup online as part of the site's kind of growing history. We can do a photo call through like a social media with like a tag, you know, lakefront photos, something like that, where people are sharing it and engaging with the project as the project is moving forward. And then you might be reaching out and saying, hey, that's a great photo. Do you have a copy of that we can scan? So it gives people a way that they can participate. Couple of ways that we can have these framed. We can do, you know, simple photo with maybe a very small caption or caption on the back, something that tells you a little bit about what's happening in the photo. There's also a handful of, you know, more formal photo as part of a layout where it's got more information. A lot of different ways that we can approach the storytelling, but the key would be that you're standing on the deck, you're, you know, looking out at the water, and you're effectively looking at the same view that's in the photo that's in front of you, so that the images are large enough that you can really put yourself in that space. Okay. Again, these not large. I wouldn't recommend anything that's like a 24 by 36 sign. This is not a very big park. We probably could fit one or two of those large standard NPS waysides, but I would honestly say, as important as views are here, I would do fewer of them. I would do smaller, incorporated into things that we already have going on. And so 8 by 10 is a wonderful photo frame size. So I would do, you know, kind of, you know, 10 to 12 as the maximum size of these elements. There are a handful of ways that we could mount them. Initially, I was thinking, you know, something like a simple round frame on a stake might be a classy way to kind of incorporate it and think about that viewpoint. There's also, you know, these Corten bases are, it's a nice element. It looks pretty slick in the landscape. They're not super expensive. Most contractors can install them. They're also difficult to steal, which those little stakes in the ground, you know, might be something that might be a little bit easier to walk off. But there's a lot of options, and that's one way that we can cost manage if this is an exhibit that you guys are excited about. Okay, so discussion on this stuff. And I did want to talk about some art integration. So one of the things that I love about this example is that it may be a really wonderful opportunity to engage artists, whether they're child artists or whether we look for Northwest Native artist, an indigenous artist, and ask them to design a series of plant and animal icons. Then the poster becomes very informative. We have historical naming that could happen. We've got culture and significance being discussed about, the species that are represented on the site, and some of the storytelling about them, which is really wonderful. I grew up in Alaska, and had a lot of, Inuit friends, and the storytelling was something that was, I still remember those stories. I tell them to my own daughter. They're fantastic. So I think the storytelling of animals and the, like this is Crow is one of these. So anyway, I just think it's a really, really wonderful way of taking something that instead of saying, make us a big sculpture to put in this place, it's more like fabricate these designs. We would then have the designs made into stamps. Those stamps would be forever embedded in the construction of this place. And they could also appear on that artist's, greeting cards that are sold in the lobby or something, or at the art fair. It seems like a very interesting way of saying, this is of the place. There's more, there's deeper connection to this. And then we can also do something similar to that with the bases. So if we are looking at doing a base construction, there are lots of metal fabricators that do wonderful work. We could also do something like a sketch that's then a laser cut into the bases of these things that are then repeated through the park. So a couple different ways that we would be able to engage an artist. And I think in a really meaningful commission that is innovative in terms of what the art call would be. And I think it doesn't rely on the city paying $120,000 to purchase a unique piece of sculpture to put in the park. This is something that we could do cost effective. I know you had mentioned a while back that, well, it was individuals that represented the Arts Council that came to the first meeting that said that there was something in the neighborhood of $30,000. Even a $10,000 commission can be life-changing for an artist who's, supporting themselves through their work. And so the more the better for individual artists who are contributing to this, but you can make a massive difference in an artist's life through a commission, even in the, $10 to $20 to $30,000 range. So I wouldn't let that amount dissuade you from seeking an artist's engagement in something like a project like this. So we've written art calls before, Facet, for projects to assist with a call. And that would be basically something that the city would pay the artist to do the work. The work would then be given to the contractor would install it. But we can help to facilitate that process. So, okay. Any feedback, discussion? I know this is kind of a lot to spring on you guys.
There's a lot. I maybe I'll ask, I think I got this, but is the idea that potentially all three of those could be integrated into the park?
Yes, and the goal would be that
One or the other.
well, right, you don't have to choose one or the other. Yeah,
Or
so
any.
it is, the goal would be that if you imagine, I guess I didn't do one that combined all of the dots together. But if you imagine each of these plans with all the dots on one page, it can be a lot, of dots. So if we wanted to have, really big pictures, I would advocate for making those water markers the size of a quarter and having them be really, really unassuming. And so it is that Easter egg. It is that thing that you notice and you go, God, what is this thing? I keep seeing it. And then all of a sudden you connect it and you go, oh my gosh, So it becomes this thing that in your repeated experience at the park, it's that nagging, provoking curiosity that makes you get to the bottom of it. And I think that that's one of the most important things that integrated interpretation in this way can do. So yes, you can do all three. All three would be in your scope. And that there is a cost consideration to that.
Sure.
There's also are we going to overwhelm the experience? We'd have to balance these things with each other. And, if we want to move into 70% and say, these are all great, get costs on all of them. And then once we get that information, you dial it down to 2, that's also okay. So number of ways that we can, figure out how to move this forward. But we wouldn't provide you something that we wouldn't say, isn't this a great idea? Now we don't have enough money to design it. We do have enough money to design these things, but that would depend on the number of unique elements, whether or not we're engaging an outside artist, whether or not we're engaging, students in the commissioning of some of this art. All of those things we would want to make sure that we're communicating about so that Facet only spends the time that's necessary. And if there is a community resource, a community person, a community genius or expert who has some art skill that the city wants to engage in a meaningful way, we can help to, you know, facilitate that. And then it's work that our design team is not doing. So can make the dollars go farther.
I really liked them. I like that, the water level one. That was kind of clever. I also like the sort of these subtle ones that you don't really necessarily get right away. So that was kind of neat. And I like that they do hit those different aspects of the comments that we got. So that was really cool. Any other thoughts?
I like what you were talking about of having it be something, a little bit of a slow burn on the interpretation. That because it is going to be a community park that people are going to come back to. And it shouldn't, you know, there should be those Easter eggs. There should be things that people don't notice the first time they come through, and that keeps building and growing on repeated visits, because that's how the park is going to be used for sure. Also, I got distracted for a while just looking at the playground. You know me. I wanted to see that playground. It looks nice.
It'll be great. Okay, well, I know I've given you guys a lot today.
Yeah, definitely a lot to think about.
Yeah, and you can
wow.
you can discuss it without me also, you know, have frank conversations and debate which one of these is the best and all of that good stuff, and
Do we have to
fill
pick
me in
one?
later.
I wouldn't have to pick one.
You don't have to pick one. But I don't expect answers today. So
Yeah.
And the hope is that after thinking about these, you know, that something will come up, you know, in a few days and you'll go, oh, wouldn't that be neat, you know? And so I hope that you guys kind of collect that sort of feedback and sentiment, and that becomes part of, you know, your contribution to these exhibits as well. So
I was also going to say, Amber, there's some people that I know. I've worked in science education and STEM education, and there are people I know who do like natural history interpretive exhibits, similar to what you have here. Would it be useful for me to pass along? Like, is this at a stage where it would be useful for you to have contact information for people, or is that later on in the bidding process?
I guess, what do you mean? Just as subject matter experts to inform the exhibits?
I mean, they're people who create these sorts of signage for parks.
Sure.
And they're artists, and they've, you know, I'm sure that they would be happy. I'm sure that they would be happy to bid on any part of this, or to have expertise that they could feed into the process.
As a licensed landscape architect, I'm actually not allowed to direct work to anybody specific on a project that I'm designing on. I can lose my license for that.
Gotcha.
But having that pool of information in terms of interested vendors is basically critical for Corey. So if this
that was my question.
Yeah,
Is it something that comes to you? Is it something that comes later in the process?
Right. So this would be if the city is going to do an art call. I don't know if the Arts Foundation has like an arts registry, like an artists registry, where basically they get informed of art calls. King County for Culture also is a great organization. Yeah, that they provide grants for individual projects. They provide grants for municipalities. So if you are interested in doing an art intervention in your city, you can actually get paired up with someone who helps people do art overlay decisions. Whether it's an individual artist or whether it's basically an art design consultant, does more than like I do, you know. So they're a great organization for that. And if you're publishing an art call, you can also circulate it through them and it will go to their entire network of people. If in order for the city to pay that person directly, if it's going to come from the city's pocket and it's not going to come from the Arts Foundation and it's not going to come from For Culture, then they probably have to be on the city's small work roster. And I can point people to that. Go and get signed up on the small work roster. I just can't make any influencing decisions. So I would say yes, those names are great. And I think you know, the better process we have, the more people bid on these things. So, you know, the more ideas that you guys would get to see in terms of artists that you could engage with and interview on who you think would be the right person to take a commission if that's the road that you go down.
Yeah, and some of these folks also, I mean, they, in addition to being artists, they also they produce the signs, they produce the text, they produce all the interpretive material around it. And I wasn't sure if that was something that you were thinking of doing, that you would do in-house, or
Facet does do that.
Okay.
I specifically have done that with Watershed for the entire time that I've been there. So it would depend on if we were doing a bunch of I would want you to take advantage of everything that's included in the scope that you're paying me for. And then anything left over or any enrichment in terms of that, absolutely. So for example, if we are doing something like the sign photographs and the work to compile the signs and do the detailed drawing of what the foundations are going to look like, basically spends out our design budget. And so it would be, hey, Josh, can we enlist someone to provide some text to accompany these photos? And that would definitely be a way that they can contribute to the project using their expertise, and that it wouldn't overlap with what the city is already paying for.
Gotcha.
So I
Okay,
think we can
that's helpful.
absolutely find some good ways to have those things dovetail. It would just, the compensation piece, I would be on the outside of, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously don't want to step on your toes or, you know, not suggesting that you couldn't do it. I just want to be sure
Well,
that that was the actual
That's the
plan.
way that we've done this before is if someone is like, we have a great photographer that's going to contribute the photographs. We have a great illustrator that's going to contribute the illustrations. That might mean that we have in our scope the ability to design one more sign. Because we are now not doing illustrations that are part of it. So again, this might be something where if they're able to provide the text content, the messaging that might describe each of these exhibits, then we get to spend a little bit more time in the design and detailing of that. Or that's money that would be else we could shift it elsewhere in the contract. It essentially is part of our design budget. So our 70%, 100% bid set includes and sort of earmark for time on interpretation. So I think we can definitely figure out something that we're not turning away interested people that want to contribute to the project.
Great, thanks.
Cool. Let me just kind of overall say, like, I don't know, I really appreciate your thoughtfulness on this. I think these are really interesting to think through for the site and the what the community wants. So I appreciate the effort that you put into it. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, we had even in terms of this one, the water level markers, we likened this to a trailblaze. So just a simple mark on a tree.
Yeah.
And we had even talked about things like, is it just a piece of blue tile or blue enamel brick that's kind of built into the building construction? But then how do we stick that on the playground? How do we, you know, so there have been a handful of ways that we've talked about what the material and visual language of this marker could be, where it gets even more subtle, even more difficult to, you know, if you look at one, do you really know what it is? But if you look at them in concert, it starts to really make itself clear. So again, this meeting is about, you know, sharing this with you guys, and then what's the tone of your interest in terms of how overt you want that to be, or do we want it to have a little bit more subtlety, and how does that play into the site construction? Cool. Great. Okay, but just so you know, that degree of feedback of we like the idea, scale it way down, is definitely feedback that when you guys kind of deliberate and think about this, that's the perfect, we want to show you enough that you can comment on it, you know, and have that comment be meaningful. It shouldn't be like an abstract idea. So if there's some design idea, which is what the exhibit is, that the idea is good, we're on the right track, let me know. You can't hurt my feelings about this stuff. Just whatever your honest opinion is about the way that we should turn the knobs and do the tweaks. That's all really, really, really great feedback to get us on the right track for our next deliverable. Okay, so last bit here. So our next steps. So our council update on July 10th. This will be at the work session. So I'll be there early doing an update and the work session, not actually presenting an update during the typical council meeting. If that's still the plan. Okay. So we're getting that cost estimate by the 3rd. That'll include life cycle cost. It will have been reviewed by the internal team, which we've already completed our review and sent those comments to the cost estimator. I wouldn't be surprised if we get it before the 3rd, but no promises. They're committed to giving it to us by the 3rd. And again, that'll go to the council that day. So the council basically has 1 week, although unfortunately includes some holidays and a long weekend in there. So I don't know how much time they'll spend getting into the meat of the estimate, but that's okay. Be there on the 10th to discuss through it, answer any questions. The 70% design review by city staff will be happening basically in July and August. I think, Corey, we have in the schedule, I think we have 4 to 6 weeks for you guys. If we could dial that back a little bit, it might be a good thing. But I know some of that will depend on, does the council say, yes, move ahead? Or is it, you know, reduce everything by 20% cost. And if that's the case, then the comments are gonna be more intense. We're gonna have more discussion, all of that. So the costs of management and value engineering revisions, those would be in that July, August timeline, depending on when we get the feedback. And during that time, we'll be advancing the placemaking and interpretive design. So if these ideas are on the right track, and this is the way that we want to move ahead with seeing these, we can carry those designs forward. I'm going to say some wild, outlandish things. If, for example, the big house went away or the playground went away, we could still see these designs implemented in the park landscape in some way. That's why we would continue with the interpretive design. I don't think those things are going to happen. But if we were thinking that we were heading towards that big of a degree of change where any of these ideas would actually not work out, we would not move them forward at all. Just so you know. Okay, so we're also continuing the fundraising support. So Corey has been managing our fundraising process, which is wonderful. And there's been some emails back and forth, and we'll continue on that. You guys remember after phase 1 in May 1st of phase 1, we met that really important fundraising deadline for RCO, which was to get a design with a cost estimate together so that we had enough information to populate a grant application that was due on May 1st of 2024, because that deadline happens only every 2 years. So if we missed it then, we wouldn't be eligible again until this coming May. So we will apply again this coming May. And
Nice.
right, it's
We have next year.
2026.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's
Oh, yeah.
upcoming. I know, it's wild, isn't it? It's just, I feel like I'm in a time machine sometimes. So yeah, so this coming May is, if we didn't make the prior deadline where we got $500,000 to be doing, towards park construction, the first application that we would have provided would have been this one coming up here, in May. So the nice thing about the application coming up in May is that, in last May, like May 2024, one May ago, we had very little work done on the park design. We had very little committed funding from other matching sources. And we had a very big funding gap in terms of the money that you had versus where we were saying we wanted to get to. That has changed dramatically by the time that we get to the upcoming May. The upcoming May, we will have done and have done already substantial amount of work on the park. We will have gotten many permits. There were grants that we could not go for last time around because we didn't have certain permissions in order to apply for those. We also have a lot of fundraising and a much smaller gap to fill. And so we intend, unless we have all the money that we need before that deadline, we do intend to stay on track with this cost estimate, this work, keeping these numbers updated so that we can make another grant application for RCO in May 2026. So we are intending to have the design complete at the end of 2025. This is heavily contingent on our hearing examiner appearance to get our land use permits closed out. And so if our hearing examiner meeting is sort of sliding, then we are also sliding as a design team. Our contract is 18 months. And if we take a month off, then we add that month on the end. And so there may be times between now and when we had initially projected to have the design finished and then to go out to bid, that we may say there's 6 weeks until the hearing examiner's meeting, work stops, we don't have our scheduled meetings, and then those get added to the end of the contract. So because we're at this point where we've got, basically six months left in our project timeline, we're gonna make it last, make it go as far as we can. And I'll continue to, keep you guys apprised of schedule and cost threats and risks. So that's where we are. I do have, I think 3 more meetings. Parks and Rec Board in scope. Yeah. So you guys will see me again at milestones that we think are important ones. So. All right, well, that's all I've got
Good.
for today.
That was a lot. Thank you.
It was a lot.
Yeah,
My
really
apologies.
good.
I was trying to keep it to an
No,
hour.
you did great.
Okay. Thanks.
Any last questions? All right.
This may be more a question for Corey. Maybe not something that Amber needs to answer, but and we may have talked about it before, and my brain is just a sieve. But is there going to be an option for people to open up the grounds in any capacity for the public to see I mean, it's possible to look through the fence now, which is fantastic. I love it. But to give a little bit of a sense of what it's like to be out there now that some of the demo has happened on site in any sort of controlled way, or is it still too soon for that?
I think too soon. I don't see that happening, but it is cleaned up more. Probably.
Yeah, I mean, I'm partly just thinking, if there is some sort of levy lift in the offing, then giving people a chance to see where the money has been going is probably helpful if we can.
Yeah, we can maybe coordinate something later, this summer, something. Well, yeah, we can talk about that. See,
And to get people excited about it, because it's
Yeah.
like real. It's cool.
Mhm.
we are, working on a poster. And we're seeing it that will go out, we're thinking like the entrance of Line Creek on the corner, so people can kind of vision. The new preserve part, and look at the park, so that'll help too,
Yeah.
good poster.
So will it go in front of the current site?
I'm thinking just like on the corner of the two
Okay.
fences.
Yeah, okay. So like right on the seam of the two properties. Okay, got it. When you first said it, I thought you meant like over towards where the walking entrance to Lion Creek Park
No.
is.
Like on the corner.
Okay, got it. That makes sense.
There's room to stand around.
Mhm. Yeah.
All right. On to our next agenda item, which is the Horizon View Art installation update.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you all.
Okay, Amber.
For that.
Um,
Skedaddle.
Yeah, so
yeah, you're welcome to say.
it's good stuff.
I thought I was gonna have more of a update, but I don't. So, it's still moving along. We're still working on it. Artist is continuing design and, I think actually the location now is more towards the, tennis pickleball court area, so I don't know if that's huge something based on that, but. It'll be in that kind of corner where it's not scan is. Yeah, we've then with the flowers, space off market.
Can you talk to us about the location change? What was the,
Near the tennis court.
yes,
Corner.
I was there for a walk, I
Yeah.
saw where, well, how did it, talk to us, Jen, about,
Oh, just
Why are we
access, that'll be the easiest place to access it, and it will be mostly accessible, it's a much larger path than what we originally thought to do. Where it can go by the playground, but this is turning into a much larger project, it's gonna be beautiful.
And I'm talking about the area that people go off leash dog.
Not like all the way over there, more like closer of that corner where the tennis court to the field. is.
Yes.
So, there's like that four.
Yeah,
And when will it be installed?
Hopefully this summer,
This summer?
fingers crossed, yeah. Yeah, and she does wanna do still community input, the design day of like some of the lower part of like the animals and mosaic design down there.
Yeah.
okay,
and I find myself needing to ask. Have you guys gotten input from the people who live around the park, if they want this, or do they know about it and?
Yeah, they know about it,
Yeah.
down at the Arbor Day event, and Ross has had it, the garden tour, and he's been doing it, so. And Ross. There's a selection committee, there was the, art council. A resident at, does gallery work. And then the Celia from Third Place Comments, Tyler, myself. What good selection of all times.
Good.
cool. Next on the list, summer events.
Turn out
Yeah.
a little calendar, so we haven't talked about the community garage sale.
Yeah.
I'm assuming we can just this year. Promote it and it'll just be the 13th without a map unless someone really. Has the gumption to do that, but I think we just will stick with the garage sale day on the 13th and we'll just do posters and start.
Yeah,
promoting.
sounds good.
Where will we?
Just your own like a
Oh,
garage sale,
oh,
like,
okay.
yeah, your own garage sale. Last year in Park November that did the mapping, like people would submit their address if they wanted to do a garage sale that day. But we're just gonna promote it as garage day.
How did that work out?
Went well, we were allowed.
Did you have a good number of people that participated?
I could, I remember the number.
Yeah, I don't remember the number, but I'll do like do a Facebook page for it and maybe people wanna. Put their own addresses and we'll be selling it in. But I've already had calls of wonderful, so.
Wow,
Good.
good.
Getting all the stuff ready for the garage sale.
Yeah, don't wanna miss it. So yeah, then pretty typical Battle of the Bands, we'll be back this year, August 23rd, there's concert in the park tomorrow.
Tomorrow,
Yeah,
6 p.m.,
6:30.
6:30.
Times are not, some of them are. Art in the park, that's the Shore Lake Arts. I think that'll be a little bit later in the day, like at 2 to 6. And picnic in the park will be back.
September.
Yeah, September 6th. So it's the weekend after.
Can you remind me of the safety fair?
That's the PD, and I think it's like mostly bike and helmets for little kids.
Yeah.
I don't know. Sound like they're trying to be the nice, so.
Okay.
Positive.
Pause in the park.
Okay. So. I am gonna try to reach out to Rotary, also, we have a Rotarian now. But Rotary did our first beer garden at picnic. And so I'm gonna try and see if they want to do a beer
These
garden.
guys always want.
And great for them. So,
The
hopefully-
jazz walk and.
Yeah, so hopefully we'll kind of bring them back into the mix here.
Good.
Cool.
Hey.
Oh yeah, well, and then that goes to the story.
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh, they're nice.
Story walk, yeah.
Yeah. We
So
got props.
we have this will be what we will have installed in our parks. So we have 6 sets of stories. It's the English and Spanish language stories of Ada Twist, Iggy Peck, and Rosie Revere in English and Spanish. So we have 6 sets of story walk that we will be installing this summer. We will have we will be complementing the Lake Forest Park Library because they do story walks at the
Right,
parks as
yeah.
well in Horizon View and in Animal Acres. They're a bit delayed because of they're sharing the story walks with other library branches.
Mhm.
And so what we'll be doing is we'll be installing in places in parks in our parks that they're not present, and we'll be doing that all throughout the summer. And each set of the story walk will be installed in a park for about 4 weeks, and then we'll switch them with another story for in July will be a different set and another set in August. Yeah,
So rotate them around.
rotate around, yeah.
One switch.
One switch,
Okay.
yeah. And we'll include a QR code because we want to be able to measure how many, engagement we get,
Sure.
and also get information or suggestions, feedback on what would be the next story walk that we could do for the succeeding for future summers. Yeah, and hopefully we'll be able to gather enough information. We can even apply for a grant from horticulture to support, because this set of story walk is sponsored by BN Builders initially for Meridian Park's STEM Fair. And we're just using the materials that we've already but moving forward, because the printing is expensive, we would want to get grants to support it. Yeah, and we'll be looking at bilingual. I've talked to the Lake Forest Park library librarian about them creating a suggestion that we can then print ourselves.
So what is involved in this? People come to the park for,
Yes, they we will market, we will promote it, ask encourage our community to go out, visit our parks, different parks. We have initially identified Animal Acres, Horizon View, Lion Peak, Grace Cole, Blue Heron, Eagle, Scout, or Whispering Willows Park, or even 5 Acre Woods if somebody wants to, because I've never been to 5 Acre Woods. I'm not familiar on how to install it there. So yeah. So encourage everyone to go out, enjoy nature, enjoy our parks, and bring their families, their kids, and enjoy it while reading the stories that we have. We have English, we have it in English and in Spanish.
How many signs are in each story? Or how
There-
much space do you need to like?
There's a total of 16 signs, including this cover page,
Okay.
plus another panel, 17
Probably 17.
17 that will have this information. A welcome with our city logo and the QR code for the visitors to use to provide us with feedback. And then with the feedback, I am hoping to get the support of our merchants at Lake Forest Park Town Center to provide us with prizes that we can then raffle off to people who fill in the feedback form. These are just small dollar donations, not more than 50, because that's our limit with the city. So
And Corey, is there any barrier to our doing it in 5 Acre Wood? I know there've been limits on how much we can promote.
We'll be able to put one of those stories out there.
Great.
we'll just need help with the installation. We will start in we'll have them hopefully by July 1st. We'll have all the parts with the panels installed. Yeah,
Also installation finished by July.
finished by
Okay.
July. Yeah,
You have a very hefty goal. And
we'll see. Yeah,
Oh,
but
yeah.
I will say, like, when we're putting them out there, like a place like Grace Cole and 5 Acre Woods, just to make sure we're doing them near the entrance.
yes.
Animal Acres, you can maybe make people walk in a little bit because you can see the signs better, but
Yeah,
Grace Cole, just make sure they're.
yeah,
What was the idea to put them on a route of some sort, like you go for a
Yes,
hike
yeah.
and you get it like. See the first few as you go and then it leads you up the hill and around the loop back down, is that the
yeah,
idea?
yeah.
Cause that doesn't sound like all toward the front.
No,
So what
like
did you-
that
what are you
would be
thinking?
hard at 5 Acre Woods.
Just cause it's so so many interconnecting
Yeah,
trails.
like there's like one, like a main trail that goes up, I'm thinking like that would be a good just kind of. drag
Yeah,
in a line.
yeah.
Um,
I would not know because I've
Yeah.
never been, but with all the other parks, it will be it will encourage people to walk around and will follow a footpath. Yeah.
And the idea is the next sign is visible
Yes.
from where you are,
Yes.
so you know where to go.
Yeah.
Right.
so it's kind of like the secret garden. They won't go for one.
But not driving.
No, no.
It's not driving.
So what you mentioned that you hinted that you need help with installation.
Well,
What's the deal?
like for Josh, if you're near a park that you can install one set and I can cover because I'm nearby Animal Acres, Whispering Willows, Lion Creek. So those parks I can cover myself, yeah.
Yeah, 5 Acre Wood's pretty close to me, and I could take stuff up to Horizon View also happily.
So maybe we'll
And
leave.
I know they've got work parties out at 5 Acre Wood, so it'd probably also be good to just coordinate with them and make sure that doesn't get in their
Oh.
way.
And Grace School, I would think, they have. work
Yeah.
parties.
Yeah.
This-
And we'll-
I'll let the work parties know that they're getting some storybook signs.
Yeah.
Because the 5 Acre Wood one is early in the month, so it'll overlap. The Grace Cole is like the third Saturday, I think. So may not overlap in the end. I don't know,
Yeah.
how long are they gonna stay up?
They've got there for this entire month.
Party.
Oh, okay.
So I'll
First
leave
and third
two
Wednesdays,
sets for
February.
Josh to pick up.
Yeah.
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 And then I can help Richie this week. Go out to a park or two.
Yeah, set it up, yeah. All right,
Okay,
That's pretty.
yes.
all right, great. If you
No
need-
barrier.
No. Let's see, I guess we're to any questions about that? I guess we already went through them. We're on to the other category. Anything we need to add to the other? Or maybe you can mention the pool meeting we went to. Was that
Yeah.
last week?
There's cities that are starting to look at aquatic partnership of some sort. Aquatics are hurting in our area. Shoreline's going out for a new aquatic center. Terrace and Edmonds have slowly aging. I wouldn't say slow aging.
Aging.
Very.
Done all their aging.
They're
aged.
aging maybe drastically. Facilities, so we're starting conversation of. Help each other out, how does that look? So. Beginning early stages, but as you guys remember, we did participate also in the North King County Regional Aquatic Study. That was Kirkland. Kenmore, Bothell, us and Shoreline, looking at our North King County area, and it showed that pools are needed.
Yeah, okay.
I can send that.
They could have just asked one of us.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I will send that study out to you guys again,
Is there
Yeah,
anything coming out of that?
the study.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's one thing to say, yes, you guys need more pools.
I'd
But-
say like Rod Dabowski County Parks did give Shoreline a good chunk of money to
Oh.
start,
Work on theirs.
yeah. As long as this King County levy passes, right? But.
And are there things that we or the city can be doing more to support? I mean, there's also a ton of money for the Lakefront Park in that as well. And, I mean, I don't know what the rules are for us as a board or the city to, say, hey, there's a lot of benefit from that levy, but seems worth talking about.
Yeah, I think you guys are welcome to be advocates on your own in however way, I don't think that's, yeah,
Yeah, it seems pretty limiting from the city's perspective on what you can say. Or probably this part I don't know, but I'm assuming our role as participants in this specific board.
Right.
Board itself, supported by the city, probably couldn't come out in favor of a particular measure.
Yeah.
But we as individuals can, or we can form a Friends of the Parks nonprofit or whatever.
Right.
Or Friends of the Parks levy, or I don't know. There are lots of ways to do it.
There must be I mean, there's probably already a committee. There's got to be for the.
I'll look into it a
benefit.
little bit if you're interested. I'm curious also. I feel like it's come up in the past where, in particular for the I think it was a levy that Lake Forest Park did a couple of years ago to fund some park maintenance
Yes.
and sidewalks, and that didn't pass.
Yeah.
And it just seemed very surprising how it came up. I don't think we on the Parks Board knew anything about it. We were not able to even look at it and figure out what it was about, and if we supported it or advocate for it if we wanted to. Just the way the city has to talk about those tax issues is pretty limiting. So to think about other ways that we can help, if that's what we're interested in, I think that'd be good to know.
And I know like with the RFA, for instance, the city council did do a resolution in support of that. And the rules, the parks levy, the Prop 1 4 years back was a city levy. And so there are different rules for that perhaps than for supporting something that comes from another body.
Yeah, it could be.
I don't know. Anyway, that's in August.
One of the things that somebody explained to me was there's a certain point in which the city can no longer advocate.
Yeah.
When it gets close, I don't know what the date is, but it gets
Yeah, there's
close
something
to
about that.
election. When it's going on the ballot, then they have to step back. And one of the other things that was discussed was there was no citizen like committee.
Yeah.
So if there was a citizen committee, when the city stepped back, the citizen committee could continue with their work. And it wouldn't create any, liability issues or whatever, because the city would no longer participate, but they didn't have that.
Yeah.
So that's something to
Timing.
look at if it comes up again, because.
Yeah.
The pushback on this is, it'll happen again, just like it did last time.
Yeah.
And there was some real misinformation going on last time, and it was very unfortunate, and I think if there was a committee of people involved and they got out in front of it early enough, it might be helpful.
Yeah. That's really interesting for this upcoming parks levy. Also interesting to think about it from the perspective of this pools issue. And just identifying the need or the community desire for these things well in advance of the ballot measure.
Yeah.
To kind of
Yeah.
hit home that they're like, oh yeah, we only have 3 pools up here.
Yeah.
Mount Lake Terrace kind of, I guess, yeah, that, if you put them in that area. Oh no, because shoreline closed. So 2.
Really
and
only two.
There aren't that many public pools, and they're getting old. And they're more expensive to run than ever. So
Any.
yeah. So how do we deal with that? Do we want to deal with that? I think people would, but I don't mean to go on the pool route. This is a parks meeting, but like that kind of thing. There's a way
Yeah,
to
it is part of
support
the
that.
It's parks and recreation.
Definitely recreation.
Yeah, and I'll say when we did the North King County study, this community was in high support. It was, the letters were coming in.
Really?
Yeah, so seems like a very swimming.
Well, we got a new park. It's right on the lake.
Yeah.
I feel like
So
for
we'll
safety
s-
reasons.
Aquatics to offer to our neighbors, just in a different way.
Right. No lessons, probably.
I
mean, maybe, I don't know.
No lessons, yeah.
Sure. Anything else in the other category on our agenda?
Hey, I'm jumping ahead here, Corey, but I'm just gonna, Corey and I have already talked about, taking a look at doing some restoration work in Blueberry Park.
Oh, great.
And that's been on my agenda for like 35 years, so I'm, ready to get rolling on
Cool.
that again.
Nice.
It's come up and it fell down and just never happened, so I'm hoping that this time maybe can get it to happen. And if you go out there and look at the sign, underneath it, in a really small sign says supported by Lake Forest Park Rotary. So therein lies a tale of getting people out there to work.
Oh, it's like they pre-volunteered.
And it also might be a good scout project.
I was thinking that too.
Yeah, and what I wanna do first is Corey and I go out there and maybe with Drew and really take a look at what needs to be done, what's reasonable to start, but have a plan, not just go out and clean up.
Right.
Waste of time. You wanna have an ongoing plan. What's the goal? What's the end goal? And are we gonna do restoration planting, which I really wanna see happen, but first, what has to happen, you know? And then if you got that going, then you get more momentum than just these random kind of things that, you know, don't have a focus.
Great.
Start there, eventually, hopefully, to the spring willows, but that's down. Yeah. Right, you know, the rest.
By the time the ducklings are gone. I've grown up.
Well, I was out there recently with someone from the Stewardship Foundation, and he identified a huge amount of really toxic plants. At first, he thought there were only a few, and and he was gonna go and take them out himself, because apparently he's got some kind of credentialing or something that he can do that. But as we continued to walk, there was so much more that he went, he said he was gonna contact the people at King County Toxic Toxic Plant and get them to come out and do it. And then he left for Europe, so I don't know where that's at, but so that's a whole other situation. You know, hopefully, eventually, something will happen. I was initially with the group that was working on that park, and when it was first being developed, and so many problems, and it never came to fruition the way it was supposed to be. So it would be nice to see eventually something happen to make it really positive and inviting, and have what's planted there really say the right things, show the right things to the community. I'm really big on community education, and I think that would be great if we could eventually get that done too. But we'll start. For that.
Well, and so the city, I mean, if there's maintenance stuff to be done, I think there's a whole department for that. Not a big
Called
department,
volunteers.
right? Yeah, or they can at least identify kind of how to do it, things like that, so. That would be,
They're not
oh, wow,
skilled in, plant stuff and all that. It's helpful to get some ideas, but they don't do anything. So, yeah.
Maintenance needs to be.
yeah,
So anyway, I'm hoping to move forward with that and get that going, get people interested and involved, and yeah, definitely scouts. How old are your scouts?
12 to 17.
Oh, perfect, because I was thinking little big guys might.
We have those too, but they're not our group.
Okay, but yeah, that's a real good age start,
They can do stuff.
talking about the environment and what's happening.
Yeah.
That's a great place because of the salmon spawning, the stream, and what the problems have been
Mhm.
with that, and all of, so it's a really good educational
Yeah,
experience.
it's just
too.
fine.
Because you don't want to just take these kids out, say, all right, 4 weeks and they're done. It's not any kind of an experience for anybody.
Yeah, most of them, well, the older ones are looking for an actual project to take on and design and fundraise for
Okay,
and manage and get other people involved to do the work and then complete. So not they just want to go and lead. That's not useful.
yeah,
They don't want to just go do general maintenance. That's not part of the project. And that's what counts as their Eagle project, right?
Right.
So I have
sure.
in my group, there are probably 6 or 7 scouts who are looking for that probably in the next year or so. So
Great.
all sorts of ideas are welcome. Send, I don't know. It's supposed to be the scouts idea, so we've been trying to have them take on this step of contacting all these an organization and trying to design a project that fits. So it's part of the lesson that they're learning, right? And how to support the community, how to take on and lead and project manage something kind of big. It also doesn't need to be redesign a waterfront park. It's not
Right,
that big.
exactly.
So bite-sized.
Yeah, we had a 3rd grade class from LFP Elementary that when they ended up helping the grandma of a kid find some plants, but The LP classroom, they walked down the blue heron, they planted 5 plants, they had someone that come out there that found out the history of that area, David Berkey, this Shoreline Historical Museum, then they went to the Civic Club. And he did like a little talk for them for the day, and then they walked back up as their
Good walk.
walking field trip, so. Hoping to partner with the schools a lot more, doing some outdoor field trips. to
Great.
I
I
just
think
did,
the woods right there.
I just did a talk with one of the other master gardeners to the second grade class at we did a whole presentation about pollinators.
Cool.
God, they were so much my kids are like 50 years, so I'm thinking second graders use.
They know a lot of stuff. Yeah.
God, they're wow, the things they were asking, I'm like. Hey,
Oh, I wish I could remember what I knew in second grade.
But
I think I know exactly what I know in second grade. It's not that much.
But it was great to have that input and to see those kids have that knowledge and the interests in, and the
Yeah.
questions that they asked were, it was very nice. It's very good.
I like it.
Yeah.
Well, with that, I think, oh gosh, we're getting at 9 o'clock already, kind of a long meeting.
So-
Josh, show your hands up. I
Just two,
see.
two quick things.
Yeah.
I see in the Zoom chat, Matt had mentioned that he would love to support any aquatics conversations in any way. So make sure that that doesn't get lost. And then I texted Alice and she and Rob are happy to do the map again for
Oh, wow.
the garage sale. So
Okay.
we can have a map again.
Thank you. Thanks for connection with her. Great. She does a lot of stuff.
She was enthusiastic about it. I didn't have to twist her arm.
Nice.
Yeah, let's make sure.
Yeah, no, to be
Oh,
clear.
well, speaking of Alice, should we talk at all? Should we talk about yoga in the parks at all? Scott?
I'm just gonna not be able to get to it this
Okay.
year again.
Got it.
Is that gonna happen again?
I. Hopefully next.
Our recreation department is also many other departments.
Yeah.
So. Okay, got it. Thank you. Okay, I guess now's the time we open it for public comment, although we've kind of been integrating public comments. Is anybody else around who wants to do a public comment?
Hi. You can come.
All right, I don't see any popping up. I guess I should look at my agenda to make sure I get everything. I think that's it, right?
Okay.
Okay, so, do we have a meeting in July?
Yeah.
Do you have that date handy?
So
Oops.
July. July 22nd.
22, yeah. Oh, I already know for a fact I'm out that day. Pretty sure.
You like moving it a week up or after?
I could do either. I have no strong preference.
Let's do the 15th. 15.
Okay.
Well, alright, hello.
How does that look for you, Josh?
I don't see anything on my calendar for any of those evenings, but I feel
Yeah.
like I'm forgetting something, so.
The summer gets busy.
There's nothing on our city calendar.
Okay.
I'm hoping maybe, either bring or both Stewardship Foundation or the Shoreline Historical Museum, to start conversation with, Stewardship Foundation. We haven't brought them in as one of our partners yet to brainstorm, as it might have good ideas on things. And then just continuing conversation with the Shoreline Historical Museum on so collecting history for the
Park. Yeah. Sounds pretty good.
Alright.
Okay, well, any other agenda items? Maybe talk to Corey. We can work that out. Okay, with that, we are adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Great. Great seeing you all.
Bye.
Nice
Thanks,
meeting you,
Maurice.
Maurice.
And Maurice and Linda will be at the next council meeting if anyone would like to join.
They're just gonna show up and hang out.
No.
Are they getting reviewed
Getting
by the
grilled.
council?
Maurice, can you, are you gonna be around July 10th, around 7 PM? You're
You're muted. I've been through this so many times, but it's a different cases. Maybe different questions.
I mean, maybe. A pretty light touch in my memory. They're like, oh God, somebody volunteered, thanks.
This will be, she's back again? Since she in a nursing home already? Yeah. Oh. No. What do you know about this?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm wondering.
They're muted now.
She's.
Oh.
been in a nursing home.
Like July 10th is a possibility.
Okay. I'll get in contact with your people. How about that?
Okay, that'll work.
You people coordinate.
Thank
All right,
you.
sounds good. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Enjoy your summertime.
definitely.
Go visit a park.